So there's definitely pros and cons for traditional publishing versus self-publishing. I know because I created my own publishing company called Con Todo Press. So I've been through, and I'm going still through, right, that difficult road. So the big five that Davina mentioned right now is Penguin Random House, Hachette, HarperCollins, Macmillan, and Simon & Schuster. And I read somewhere that they're responsible for over 60% of all English language books sold. So that's not a good number if we're not getting a piece of that pie, right? Julissa, you were traditionally published, which is great because they have the infrastructure for promotion, right? They have the infrastructure for distribution, etc. What advice would you give someone that wants to explore traditional publishing before they possibly dive into self-publishing?
Just because you're not getting published traditionally doesn't mean that your story isn't important. It doesn't mean that it's not good. It means that you maybe don't have the access to that. Because I think so much, and if you've read my book, you know this, right? So much we are waiting for the dominant culture to validate our work. We need to validate our own work. Everyone who's sitting here, beautiful faces, you validate my work, not anything else, not because I was published traditionally. And of the five, I mean, I am proud, you know, of the 5 big publishers, 2 of them is who have published my book. So 2 out of the 5, I'm gonna go 5 for 5 before I'm done. Okay. But what you said is so important, so thank you so much for saying that. I think, you know, I talked to other friends of mine who have been published traditionally, and I think there's sort of I personally was very naive into going into traditional publishing, thinking once my book gets published by a traditional publisher, it means it's going to be successful. It means it's going to have, you know, all of the distribution, all of the marketing, and the truth of it is, as an author, it really is up to you to make sure your book is successful. And like, yes, you do have the support and the infrastructure. Like, I don't have to call bookstores to say, hey, can you guys carry my book? Right? So I do think that the distribution is probably the biggest pro of going the traditional route. I don't know exactly how many stores carried my last book, but I know that it was carried all across the country. All in, you know, my book was an indie bookseller, meaning that independent bookstores, many of them carried my book in order for it to be an independent bookstore bestseller, right? It was an actual brick and mortar stores, not just on Amazon, not just on Barnes and Noble's online. So I think that the distribution part is probably the biggest advantage of going traditionally. But my biggest advice to you, if you are, you know, a new author that is going to get published by a traditional publisher, is that you really have to advocate for yourself. You really have to tell them what it is that you want out of the promotion, right? I was sort of had to really advocate for myself to say, you know, I want to do this many events in this many stores. Even now, you know, every time I go to a conference, I contact my publisher and say, hey, I'm going to do this conference. Can you put me in contact with a bookseller that can come do a book signing for me? It's because the truth of it is, once your book is published, you sort of get lost, right? Because publishers are focused on their list, on their next list, on their fall list, on their spring list. And once your book is done, you sort of become an afterthought, to be honest. And it's not because there's anything sort of mean going on, it's just because they have to focus on their next authors, right? The books that are coming out. So my biggest advice is you have to advocate for yourself. And you have to put in so much work to make sure that your book is going to be successful. And you have to give them all the ideas. Like, you have to be the one being like, hey, I want to do this. Like, I can't, you know, I think my best experience was with my last book. And it was a lot different experience than with my first book. But I can't tell you things like, there were times when I wouldn't even get like social media assets. Right? Like, I would have to be like, hey, I saw this author do something like this, can you help me create it? Because that is their job. And that is part of what they bring, that's part of the reason why you publish with them and why they get such a big percentage of every sale after you write the book, right? Because they're supposed to be doing that for you. So my biggest piece of advice is just you have to advocate for yourself so that you don't get lost in the mix.
So again, there's pros and cons for traditional versus independent. When you're independent or you self-publish, then you also get 100% of the royalties, right? 100% of the profits. But there's also so many other things you need to take care of. So Davina, that's my next question for you. Talk to us about the challenges of being an independent publisher or a self-published author.
Yes, so don't get sad. Hopefully someone here is going to change this, and I definitely want to add my piece into this. Talking about distribution too, because I think this is part of it. As independent publishers, distribution is not the same. So I got approached by a big distributor, actually like almost 2 years ago, and I was like so excited, because once again, you're like, oh, I'm being chosen, and like, unfortunately, I learned so much along the way because they had very few publishers that do bilingual work. So like, they were just like misspelling the Spanish titles. They put us at the bottom of their list. And they were like a big distributor, and I signed with them the first year, and I had I'm like, thank God I managed to get out of it in good terms. But I'm like, no, I'm not giving them that power because they're putting us in like the last list of priorities, and they were just not giving respect to our authors and our titles. So distribution, if any of you want to do distribution business for Latino authors, there is a lot of room there, business idea, because we're not there. So the distribution is a big challenge, and something that I really advocate for is that, of course, the marketing dollars for like an indie press, they're not the same that a big five. So the marketing dollars, I would say, now have to come in you as an author being super proactive, learn about digital marketing. I think that's a tool that goes a long way for any type of business. And as an author, like I know a lot of like our friends and like they get published traditionally, and it's beautiful to see that like you said, it's not like, oh, I'm set forever and I'm just here lounging on a hammock. Like, you guys have to work even harder sometimes because you have the pressure like to sell books, to keep that relationship alive, so that's what I said. As an indie author, you gotta be super proactive on social media, do as many events, build your community, and guess what? That's gonna come in handy if you do wanna go the traditional route when you get signed, because you have to do all that stuff, and you actually have more to lose too, in a way. So I think the challenge of the low budgets in marketing, distribution, is definitely kind of like two of the top ones.
Yeah, and if I can just add one thing, right? When you get published, and I don't know that, I certainly didn't know that this is how it worked, but when you get published traditionally, you get paid in advance, right? And many times that advance, you don't get it all at once. You'll get a third of it when you sign, a third of it when you turn in your manuscript, a third of it when you publish. And then every single book that gets sold goes against your advance. Once you have sort of, in a way, paid back that advance through sales, then you start getting royalties. And actually, very few books earn out. That's what the term. Many few books actually earn their advance, and you start getting royalties. So for many authors, the advance is the only money they will actually ever see, right? From when you sign with a publisher. Because if you don't sell enough books, then you don't pay out that advance, you don't get royalties. And for a lot of authors, though, unless you have another job, and so you have income from another job, doing the traditional route is really the only way that realistically you would be able to do it. Because when you're self-published, you're spending all this money to market, to print, all of that. And yes, you get to pay 100% of the money that you make, but you have to wait to earn all of that money, right? Where for me, I'm a full-time writer. I don't have another job other than I write and I speak, right? And so unless I get advance, I can't sit there and write my books because then I would have to go get another job to make money, right? And to pay for my expenses. And so I just wanted to kind of point that out in case it's helpful for people to kind of understand when you're trying to make that decision as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing is it's passion that's ultimately going to keep you writing more books, right? Whether you're traditionally published or you're self-published. Because if you don't have that passion, you're not going to become a millionaire. Am I right?
Very few authors I know are millionaires.
But let's say yes, it's on its way.
It's on its way. Let's think positive.
Everybody here is going to go out and buy one of my books.
You get a million. Let's think positive. Julissa, you are such an advocate for our community. You are an activist and a writer. So I want to ask you about the landscape of publishing. You followed it very closely, and you've been in a lot of different panels that have fought the good fight to have more representation in publishing. How is the landscape now? Your book was published in 2016. We're here 2024, almost 10 years, 8 years. How has it changed? Are we better off as Latino writers, do you think? Or are we still like riding that struggle train?
I think it's a little bit of both, right? Because I do think that we've made progress. I am so excited every single time that I see a new book being published through a traditional publisher, and I do think that I see more and more of them being published. So I do think that it's gotten better. I think that because a lot of us aren't out there sort of sharing what our advances are, I think it's hard to know for the books that are getting published what do the advances look like now versus then. I do think that once you have some success, you've earned higher advances, right? And so the hope is that every time you publish a book, your advances are bigger and bigger because your books have done well. So I think it's definitely gotten better, but we are not where we need to be, right? Davina, you were talking about some of the really big hires that were made in the wake of 2020, right? George Floyd, American Dirt, I forget what the hashtag was, but basically authors were sharing what their advances were on Twitter, and there was really big discrepancies, of course, versus like what a white author was getting versus like authors of color. So all of this really pushed publishers to take a look at what their hires look like, right? And the thing about publishing, so this what you're asking is a really big question because there's a lot at play, right? One is like the author piece of it, but the other is like who's actually getting hired at the publishers. Right? Publishers, editors, when they first start, and their assistant editors, they don't make a lot of money. And so if you have to go move to New York City and get paid, what they get paid, I mean, a lot of times, unless you sort of have your parents able to supplement your income, you can't really even have a decent living, a sort of entry-level publishing role, right? And so the problem is really big. And that's why it's gonna take many multiple approaches to fix the problem, many multiple approaches to have more Latino authors be published traditionally, because we also have to focus on making sure that more Latinos are getting hired at various levels within the publishing world that can advocate, that understand the nuances of our community, what's going to resonate with our community. And so it's a little bit of both. We're doing better. We cannot take our foot off the gas, because I think that as soon as we do, unfortunately, the people who hold the levers of power will just kind of forget about it. They'll sort of say, we did these things 3 years ago and that's enough. And we know that it's not, that we have to keep on in order for there to be actual, real, lasting change.
Definitely. And I think it's important to keep telling our stories, whether you're blogging or, on Instagram, just keep putting your stories out there, because I do feel that the big five publishing, se hacen los que no ven. They pretend they don't see it, but they know that the market share is changing, because a lot of independent publishers, out of the need of having more of our voices, are emerging, and they do see. They just, if they want to choose to see, maybe they don't, but money talks, right? And your money is your vote. So when you buy a book from an independent publisher or a traditional publisher from a Latina author, you are saying, I vote for this kind of book, for this kind of author, for this kind of story. So it's really important for us to keep supporting other Latina authors, because we write amazing stories, right? We write universal stories. Stories about grief, about joy, about everything, not just suffering, that too. So, you know, I'm just doing a little call out to keep supporting other authors. So this panel is called Road to Publishing. I'm curious, how many of you have a dream or have dreamt of publishing your own book? I think that's beautiful because I think all of us have a story to tell. I used to have an interview show called Todos tenemos una historia que contar, and I think it's so true, and all of our stories are valuable. So I want to get a little behind the scenes advice from both of you. When you're sitting there and writing, which is a lonely task, how do you break out of writer's block? Like, what are tools that you both use? Because writing is easier said than done, right? Right when you're pen to paper or on the computer, sometimes the words just don't come out. What advice do you give for writer's block?
Well, I think, first of all, I always think and tell my students or my writers, what's your purpose for writing this book? I think when you take it to a purpose level, you know that it's deeper than just sharing your story, is greater than yourself. And when you know that as you write your story and you connect with other Latinas, Latino authors or people out there, you are, like you're saying, we are advancing each other, right? And to kind of add a little bit about what we were talking about in the last question, I think we should strive in a perfect world for like collaborations between the big five and some of our Latine publishing companies, but I think we have to create our own empires, our own publishing empires, because I do believe that even though there is a little change in the positive side of things, I believe we're just getting started. So if you want to write a book, there is a lot of access as far as doing it yourself. You don't have to literally spend a fortune. You just need the right guidance, a community, get with other people that are writing books, and don't wait for more time. Don't wait for anybody else. I think that's like my piece of advice, because I always say our stories matter, okay? And don't let anybody tell you otherwise.
Julissa?
Writer's block. Oh man. So I never get writer's block, so I don't know what no, I'm just kidding. I do think, I think that for my first two books, it was about me and my life, right? So I knew the story that I wanted to tell. That doesn't mean that I didn't get stuck in figuring out how to tell a story or what the right words were to use or how I wanted to organize the book. Certainly that happened. I think for my last book, because it was a very different type of book for me, I did sort of get stuck in different places, and I think the best advice that I have for anybody that's experienced writer's blocks is just like leave it alone for a minute. Go for a walk. Find inspiration somewhere else. Anytime that I couldn't figure out how to write or what I wanted to write next, I would go read a book. Because I would pick up a book, read it, and something in that book would like spark something in me to go back to my writing. So if you're sitting there just like banging your head against the wall, you might not get anywhere. So just leave it alone for a minute. Go to sleep, take a nap, come fresh to it the next morning. But I do think there's different types of writer's block. There's the one where this would be helpful, just leave it for a minute, come back to it. Then I think there's the writing block that's really more about self-doubt, where you're writing and you read what you wrote and you're like, this is all shit. Sorry, there's kids in the audience. You're like, this is all terrible, and I would edit myself as I was writing, which was like never a good thing, because I was just very critical of my own writing, right? And so what I do now is I write everything I want to write. I don't go back and read it. I just write. The next day or whenever I'm done with that writing, then I go back and I edit it. And some of it is not great. Some of it is actually really good, and I can build on that. Right? So I think you need to kind of just really ask yourself the question: am I really not writing because I don't have the ideas, because I don't know what to say? Or am I doubting myself that I can actually do this? Do I have doubts that I have the ability to write it? And the answer is you absolutely have the ability to write it. You have to believe in yourself, you have to practice, you have to read. I am of the mindset that if you want to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. You have to read like so many books in order to be a good writer. Some people don't believe that. Some people believe that you don't have to read to be a good writer. I think you do. So I think you have to ask yourself, what is my actual problem? Is it actually that I don't know or that I don't believe?
So as a small publisher, Con Todo Press, I do get approached by aspiring authors, Latina authors, and I love it. I have an idea for a book, and the first thing I say is, write it. So literally 80% of the people that approach me about, I have an idea for a book, I'm like, amazing, great, write it. So that's the first hurdle. Like, yes, it's good to have an idea, but you have to write it, and like Julissa said, put it out on paper, and own it and believe in it, because your story is valuable. So I just wanted to say that. And also find community. It's so true what Davina said. There's like a contest right now for Latino authors from Independent Spirit Publishing and Cultura Press. We're doing a contest. They approached me to partner with them, where we are going to publish a Latino children's book author. There's money, prize, blah, blah, blah. But if you're not searching for those communities and those opportunities, you're not going to find them. So definitely try to find those opportunities. We only have 10 minutes, so I really want to delve into your book. You sound like a white girl. Talk to us a little bit about it, and because it's available at Casita Bookstore here in the little courtyard. So talk to us about that book. It was published in 2022. That's your third book, correct?
Yeah, You Sound Like a White Girl is my third book. For those of you that are not familiar, it's really a manifesto, a polemic against assimilation. Because I think so many of us are made to believe that in order for us to be successful, we have to give up our culture. We have to give up so many pieces of ourselves, when in reality, in my experience, it has been my culture where I have found the most success. It has been my people, my community, like I said earlier, that validate my work. And so in the book, the first half of the book is sort of about dispelling the lies of assimilation, the lie of English, the lie of success, I forget what the lie of whiteness. And then the second part of the book is about reclaiming all of the things that we lose when we assimilate, reclaiming our identity, our culture, our own narrative, our history. One of the things that I really wanted to do in the book was to share so much of the history that I learned while doing research for the book that really helped me to understand just how deep my roots are in this country, and that nobody could ever tell me that I don't belong here. And yes, you can clap for that. And so much of that came truly from the history that we're never taught in school. I think that is like one of the biggest dangers of schooling right now, is that we do not learn our own history. And if we do not learn our own history, then we're made to believe that we just got here. And some of us did. I'm an immigrant to this country, but our people didn't just get here. And we have such a big, deep history in this country. And so history in the book was such a important piece of it. And I'm so happy to hear when people tell me, oh, I learned this in your book for the first time, or I wasn't taught this in school. And so that's what the book is about. I think that so much of what I wrote, I could have written it yesterday, because it's still so relevant to everything that's happening today. Yeah, and you didn't ask me this, but for my next book, it's going to be very different.
That was going to be my next question. What's your next book about? Is it nonfiction or fiction?
No, it's nonfiction. And I'm writing about, motherhood. Because motherhood has kicked my butt. And I was sharing backstage that I was like, I don't know if there was something about me, my past experiences, that I feel like I've had such a difficult time, or like, do a lot of women experience this very difficult time and we just don't talk about it enough? Just very, very quick story, because I think it's fascinating. I mean, first of all, like the patriarchy is so dangerous and so crazy. But like, did you know that, you know, this story that we learn in science class that like the sperm swim and like it's the fastest sperm and they swim and they like impregnate the egg, right? I mean, that's how babies are made. Not really how it happens, y'all. What happens is that the egg engulfs the sperm. It's such a small thing, but it's such a mind-blowing thing to me because I think that's the first lie of the patriarchy that makes us women believe that we're passive vessels in the process of creating life. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. That's going to be page 1 of the next book.
That is so amazing already. That blew my mind, and it really resonates because I have a quote from Julissa. I can't find it right now, but you basically, in one of your speeches, you said that we have to be our own historians, right? So that is a prime example. Something like what she said blew my mind because who is writing the story, and depending on who is writing the story, has the power in the story. In this case, the women, the egg is the one that chooses the sperm, but we were taught the opposite. So it's just really powerful. So thank you for sharing that. I learned something new today.
Yeah.
Davina.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Davina, you publish other authors. So I'm curious, how do you pick what authors, what's your process like for the authors that you publish?
Yes, so for me, once again, access is everything. So literally, if you found us through Alegria Publishing, through Instagram, that's how most of our writers find us. There is no one that we turn away. There is no this type of elitist system. If you want to write a book, we have the classes designed from all different levels, from page 1 to the day that you finish your manuscript. So we actually welcome everyone.
Pues muchas gracias. Thank you so much, Julissa Arce. Thank you for coming here and giving us your time. We know that you're a new mom, and we know it's so difficult to everything, coordinate, babysit, blah. So muchas gracias. We really appreciate it. And Davina, she's a sponsor of this inaugural. When we called her up, oh my God, Davina and I have known each other for a long time. I was your teacher, remember?
Yes, Naibe, life is so beautiful, and that's one thing. There is nothing like relationships. Nowadays, we're on the phone all the time, but I tell you, most of the success I have today is because of people like you, of community. Don't take for granted this opportunity to be one-on-one. That's what keeps us alive, inspired. So yeah, Naibe was one of my journalism teachers back in, we don't want to age ourselves, but at UCLA, so yes.
So, but what I was going to say was when I called Davina to see if she wanted to be part of this, she said yes, and I want to sponsor too because I want to support what you're doing. So, Latinas helping Latinas.
Yes.
Thank you so much.